we go. All right, let's see if we can get this thing going. Is there any way someone can grab a sign-in sheet? See if we get this working, guys. Come on. Yes, the hardest part of the night. At least it's working over here. It's not working over here, is it? Let's see what we can do here. Here we go. Yay. All right, guys. Well, welcome. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. And tonight we're going to do Family Recovery Group. My audio visual was there a second ago. Now it's gone. Don't know what happened there. Let's see what we can do. This should do it. All right. So we should have a sign-in sheet coming around. Joni's going to grab that. If you don't mind, throw your name and phone number on there and email. We'll keep in contact with you. Again, my name's Rich. I'm the CEO here, and we're going to talk tonight about anything related to family recovery. If you're in recovery and you're in the room, you're more than welcome to stay. But if you try to share from a perspective for the family. All topics are good topics. All questions are good questions. I'm going to go through and talk about some of the things that I kind of pulled out and some suggestions we had at the beginning. Before people got here, we talked about different options. But if you have questions or ideas or things we should be talking about, bring them up. Here's my agenda for tonight. Go through in general again, just because it's an important part of the conversation. Talk about what addiction and recovery, what that is, what that looks like, how it affects the brain, and get any questions answered related to that. And then I was going to move into some information around codependency and enabling. I'm not the biggest fan of the term enabling. I'm not the biggest fan of this idea because I feel like to a certain degree it makes people feel bad about themselves. I've noticed with family members a lot of times when I'm talking to them, people will literally refer to themselves as the poster child for enabling. I've been told that quite a bit, and when they say it, their shoulders are slumped, and they sort of have this internal view. You can tell that that's a bad thing. That there must be something wrong with me if I'm enabling so and so. I don't want you to think about that. We're going to go over that. We're going to use that term, and we're going to talk about that term. But I don't want it to come off in a negative way. That's not the case at all. Enabling or codependent behaviors or whatever label you want to put on it, it arises because over time you respond to situations and you do the best you can in any given situation. And sometimes that's a bad decision. We all make bad decisions. Sometimes we overdo it. Sometimes we overprotect. Sometimes we don't see what we really should see. How many people, by a show of hands, have thought that they're crazy and they didn't actually see what they just saw? Yeah, because we'll tell you didn't see what you just saw. And we'll tell you over and over again, and I've said in here before, we'll tell you in very creative ways. And if you give me enough time, we'll convince you of that fact. So I want to talk a little bit about how that happens and what's going on in that case. But does anybody else have any other certain ideas in their mind or any questions that they have that they want to get answered tonight? Anything going on that you feel like you definitely want to talk about tonight? We'll put it on the list and make sure we get to it. Anyone? Yes.
There was an interesting article in the Greenville Time the other day about a judge. I forgot what state it was in, but he was tired of just sending kids to prison, and nothing was being done when they came back out. But somebody there talked to him about acupuncture. I had never heard of that. And
yeah.
Even he tried it. He said, well, it's not that painful. And They said it still had to be part of a structured program. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, and it actually is. The question was, what about acupuncture and how does that play into recovery programs? It's really being used by a lot of recovery programs, to tell you the truth. It's becoming more and more mainstream. Different techniques are being tried in residential programs, not so much in outpatient programs. You know, in a residential program, a rehab, we got you. You're there, you're a captive audience. That's a good time to do experiments on you, right? Poke you with things, get you to ride a couple horses, do some yoga on the beach, all that kind of stuff. We got a captive audience. I don't know the underlying principles of acupuncture. I do know it's becoming more and more mainstream. I think it's becoming more and more mainstream in medicine in general, and kind of an alternative way of going about this. Hey man, I don't want to say I'm for anything. I'm not going to say that, but I'm open to all different types of ideas in terms of helping people, right? I mean, we know that we can't look at this as a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. And if acupuncture works, if massage works, or whatever it is, give it a shot. I just don't think, I don't think people really quite understand exactly why it would be helpful and what that would be all about. And then the second thing, you got to remember, the hardest thing about recovery, or the hardest thing about family recovery, dealing with somebody, is what do you do when they're outside of the residential bubble? We can get you into a rehab. We can get you into a facility where you're going to be, locked away from the world, right? And generally speaking, we can keep anybody clean, anybody sober in a situation like that. The problem is you cannot live in a rehab for the rest of your life. And so what happens is, what do we do with people when they come back out? Whether it's acupuncture, 12-step meetings, favor meetings, individual therapy, group therapy, how do we get people to do what they need to do when they're out in the free world, so to speak? Which is a really weird thing to say, because rehab's not actually jail, despite what they've told you. Okay? And a lot of rehabs are pretty nice, right? You guys should go to rehab. I say this all the time, man. I'm opening up the business model, and something's going down, and I'm telling you, you guys are gonna be in rehab, and you're gonna be chilling, and I'm gonna take your phone off of you because you're not allowed to have contact for 10 days, and we're gonna get you some acupuncture and some yoga on the beach. And then every afternoon we're going to do group therapy where you can sit and you can talk about the stress of everything that you're dealing with. That should be an option, in my opinion. And it is an option to a certain degree. You can do certain programs, but it's not commonplace. In certain countries, you cannot go to rehab unless your family comes with you. In certain Middle Eastern countries, there are some issues around substances, and the way that the system is set up, the whole family has to come. Now, you have to understand that it's a very small, minute group of people who wind up doing rehab. It's kind of reserved for some of the elites, but you can't come and do it unless your family comes with you. Very interesting idea, right? Maybe there's something to that. Maybe that's how the model evolves. Maybe eventually the family actually does come and spend 30 days at the facility. Yes, ma'am.
There was something else that occurred to me with regard to enabling, that term enabling. I've been thinking about that lately, and I've also shared at Maranon my thoughts about it. It seems to me that the people who are caring for their loved ones, the addicted or addicted relative, somehow we were brought up and trained to be good mothers or fathers.
Yeah.
And so you almost have to unlearn that. What's a natural process was considered good in terms of parenting is now completely changed.
I don't think there's any question about that. Her comment was, a lot of the stuff that's been labeled as enabling is just natural responses, especially from parents to children, natural responses to try to help, to try to take care of a person. There's no question that's the case. Now, what happens is that over time, it becomes more of an enmeshed behavior. It becomes more of a subconscious behavior, almost like there's a payoff for rescuing the person. That's the theory around enabling and codependency, when it goes from this sort of almost conscious decision of, I'm going to get in the car, I'm going to drive over to the jail, and I'm going to pull them out of jail because I want to protect them from that. That's a conscious decision, but what starts to happen is people start to automatically do it, and then it really gets complicated, it really gets complex whenever the person gives up their own personal feelings and their own personal welfare for the other person, and then they start suffering, and you start acting against your own best interest. Now you're starting to get into a whole different territory, and you're starting to get into some dangerous territory. But we have to emphasize this. This is a naturally occurring process. You're not inherently wrong because you want to help your loved one whenever they're dealing with an addiction. You're not. I think where it gets frustrating, though, is you'll be looking for answers. Okay, so let's just take, for example, a scenario, my scenario, whenever I'm doing my thing and my wife is really the only one that knows what I'm up to, and she's getting more and more fed up with me. And what's going on is she's looking for some other answer, right? She doesn't want to make me leave. She doesn't want to kind of kick me out of the house and end the marriage. Or a parent, they don't want to tell their loved one to leave. They don't want to tell their kid to leave. They don't want to do an intervention on their kid and make them go to rehab. And so you start looking for other options, and you start thinking that there's another answer. And here's what you're going to find out: at a certain point in time, there are no other answers. And this is very much a personal decision. Do you guys get that? No one can look at you and say it's time for you to, throw the hammer down, or it's time that you throw out the ultimatum, or you throw out the bottom line. I don't think it's fair for any of us to say that to another person, because it's very personal, right? You have to follow through on it. I can sit up here all day and tell you what to do, but you have to follow through on it. But I will tell you that you very well may come to a point in time where there are no other options. Do you get that? Like there really is no other option. There's no one else to talk to the person. There's nothing else that can be said. There's no magic words. You're at a point in time where it's kind of like, what am I going to do, because this isn't going to change? I'm either going to what? Put up with it and live with what I'm living with. Maybe I can make some changes there, or I'm going to make, I'm going to put out some consequences. I'm going to put out some boundaries. I think where it gets weird is when people think that there are other solutions, and you can start, if you're not careful, living in this perpetual state of anger and frustration toward other people, toward the system, toward the people who are supposed to be helping, instead of taking a look at the circumstances and say, there's nothing else we can do here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to step back. We're no longer going to bail them out of jail. We're no longer going to pay the rent. We're no longer going to allow them to live here and continue to do this. But also, if you're not there, that's okay too. Do you get that? If you're not there, that's okay. You just sort of have to be really, really honest with yourself on what your choices are. It's okay to live with the situation and continue to work with it, but be very, very honest. Yes, sir.
I kind of want to touch on what you just said. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago with my wife. She's just gotten out of Sunspire rehab down in Hilton Head. So those are the consequences. I guess what I'm looking for in terms of distinguishing between supporting her as a husband before those consequences happen and enabling her. At the time prior to her going down to Sunspire and me filing for divorce, I thought the best role as a husband was to give her all the resources she needed in terms of recovery. So managed medication, because she suffers from mental illness as well. Interacted with her doctors, provided her support, supported her when she went to favor, supported her when she went to hospitals, doctors, everything. Short-term disability correspondence, everything, because she was not of a mental capacity to handle any of it. Okay, I said, all you needed to do is your new job is to get better and work on recovery, and I will handle everything else. So, reflecting back on that, is that a form of enabling? I wasn't bailing her out of jail. I wasn't.
It's a great question.
Yeah,
I get. Yep. So.
Buying her booze.
Yeah. So it's a great question. If you're providing support, and what the gentleman was describing was this situation where he was providing support directly related to the person's behavioral health. Things like making sure that the medication was taken care of, making sure or encouraging appointments, encouraging follow through on recovery related things. I don't see that the same way. I don't see that. We have a phrase that I don't know if we've talked about it here for a while, but at Favor there's kind of a slogan, if you will, and it's, I'll support you in your recovery, but I won't support you in your addiction. And so we think that if you're helping somebody along the path of recovery, which would be things like psychiatric appointments, medication, I don't know that I see that the same way as I'm going to pay your rent while you continue to use.
The reason why I asked that question is she was very comfortable. House is paid for, food, I mean, just very comfortable. She didn't have to worry about anything. And so that comfort level, I'm not sure was helpful in terms of, let's put it this way, putting a fire under her butt to get her committed to being in recovery.
Yeah.
So, that's the thing. I reflected back and thought, well, was I really enabling the condition?
But you came to a certain. So you guys get the point. Like, so the flip side of that is, does it make it too comfortable for the person? And that's also a legitimate question. This is where it's so individualized. So much of it depends on things like how long have you been doing it for, right? So if you're doing that for too long of a period of time, a person could certainly get too comfortable with it. It depends on the age of the person. It depends on the history of the person. What other issues are they dealing with? What you see happen a lot of times is the longer this goes on, the more firm the family tends to be in terms of their boundaries and in terms of not enabling. So fool me once, okay, I get it. Yeah, I overdid it. I shouldn't have done that. It happens again. Well, maybe we're getting a little bit out of hand. It happens 3, 4, 5, 10 times. Now all of a sudden the family's like, look, I'm not going there anymore. So you have to give yourself a break while you're figuring this out. You have to really, really give yourself room to make mistakes, and nobody is going to do this perfect. You guys got to understand that, right? Nobody is going to do this perfect. There's a couple seats up here. There's a whole bunch of space up here in the front row. Got to get you up in the front row. This is where it's going to get done. But you guys get that? Do you understand? Like, you're taking into consideration all the factors that you personally are dealing with. How long have you been dealing with this? What are the particular substances that are involved? Do you feel like the person's making a genuine effort at all? Do you feel like this is moving in the right direction, or do you feel like you're just kind of like allowing the person to be comfortable in their use? Allowing the person to continue to what? Slowly but surely destroy themselves. And when you're looking at those questions and you're asking yourself those questions, you got to remember there's no black and white answer to those. Again, one last time, if I could give you guidelines, it would have to do with how old the person is. The younger the person is, the more likely you are to give them a couple chances, right? It would also have to do with how long have you been dealing with this. If you've been dealing with this for 10 years, 15 years, you're probably at the end of your rope. If you just started on this journey, you're probably in a different place. Other things, are there any kind of co-occurring mental health issues? Like, are you really concerned that this person has major depression? Are you really concerned that this person has bipolar disorder? That's going to factor into your decision. Your own personality is going to factor into this. There are some people, we just got to be straight. There are some people that are just better at what? Cutting ties and laying down the law. That doesn't mean that they're a better person than the person who isn't. Heck, there are some people who are too hard. There are. Absolutely. There are some people who are too much my way or the highway. Then there are probably some people that are too much on the other side of the spectrum, which is like, it's okay. Yeah, it's just, I know he stole that's the 5th time he stole my car, but hey, he needed to go to the dope man's house. Come on now. Let's be understanding here. You got all, and so what's the takeaway? The takeaway is try to come to groups, try to talk to people, try to think it through, be really realistic about what's going on. And that's where some of these issues with addiction come in. Again, remember, if you're dealing with somebody who has crossed that line and their brain is compromised. We've talked about this before, how addiction involves a brain change. You're not going to rationally talk this person into new behavior. This is where things like interventions start to come in. This is where things like setting limits and detaching, because a lot of times if a person crosses the line and they go from, we're just doing this for the fun of it, boys will be boys, just having a good time, just drinking a little bit to take the edge off, to this other thing, which is what's depicted in this illustration right here. On the right-hand side, on my right-hand side, this is kind of a normal functioning brain. This is with the neurotransmitter dopamine. On the left-hand side, your left-hand side, is depletion of dopamine. So this is a person who's going to chronically and compulsively seek substances. This is the person who, you're going to scratch your head and say, why in the world are they drinking again? Why in the world are they using drugs again? What is going on? There's nothing rational about it. What happens, guys, we've talked about this before, whenever you put a substance into your body, and I want to say something before I go on. Not every single person who's addicted is exactly the same. So I'm talking in generalities here. I'm talking about what we know about how brain change occurs. There are a whole lot of other factors. Age of the person, whether or not they're dealing with trauma. There's a whole lot of other issues that make this more complex. Learning issues, that kind of thing. But for the most part, you flood your brain with dopamine. You put this chemical in your body. It's too much and it's dangerous. And the brain shuts off the production of dopamine in order to compensate. And that's what you're left with here. And if you're in recovery, you know what it's like to seek the substance in order to feel normal, not for a party. It goes from feeling good to feeling normal. And actually it goes from feeling good to feeling normal to I can't even feel normal anymore. I remember that. I distinctly remember that. And one of the things about living with me when I was actively using, my wife and I were actually talking about this, it was 2 weeks ago, because it fascinates me. I always get her to tell me the story. I always want to hear the story again. And I'm not sure how she feels about that, because it's like, this was her misery, and for me it's like entertaining. There was nothing that made me happy, even if she agreed with me. Even if there was an argument and she agreed with me, I would still pick a fight. I would still want to, talk about how bad it was. There was nothing that made it okay, because I didn't know I was walking around like this. You cannot satisfy a person who is in that state of mind. A family member cannot say anything to us if we progress to that point, because it's beyond logic, it's beyond reason, it's beyond words. It's now taken on a neurobiological process. And that's when you got to be really, really realistic, and you got to know what you're up against, right? You're not going to talk sense into a person who's in this frame of mind, because we are unable to access sense. We are senseless, without sense, anti-sense. What would that be? Whatever, irrational, out of control. You're speaking English, we're speaking French. You're talking all day. You have the most accurate, rational argument in the world about what we should do, where we should go, how we should do it. Let's get you some help. Let's get you treatment. And what's our response? No, it's not that bad. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. That's because this is what's happening. Any questions about this process? Any questions or comments about this process of the brain? Yes, Cynthia.
In the research, and I'm looking at family members that are living with an individual, and they're not aware at first what is transpiring. Is there a change in our psychological makeup that probably creates sort of a hysteria on how?
So does the family member's brain change? Is that sort of what you're talking about?
I'm wondering.
So yeah, so
Are we hit with too many chemical
I don't think it's
receptors?
so. Cynthia's question is there a similar brain change that occurs for the family members? And I don't know that it's an actual brain change. See, family members have sort of been neglected in this process. We've never actually run similar scans on family members. We should. I'm telling you, I want to raise money for a PET scan, because I just want to throw everybody through it, right? Let's see exactly what's going on, man. Let's see exactly what's going on. So we don't know this for sure, but what I believe it's more of a post-traumatic stress response. Okay, so if you think about trauma, if you think about post-traumatic stress disorder, or you think about trauma, what happens is that you're exposed to a dangerous event, or your family member is exposed to a dangerous event. And repetitive exposure to life-threatening events has been shown to produce a trauma response. And so what happens is every time something goes on that triggers that trauma response, you jump and you go and you take care of it. And I think that over time will absolutely change the brain, and it'll change it in a different way in terms of what's going on with substance use disorder. And some of that's been labeled codependency over time. Now, there's also another phenomenon where the codependent behavior does start to occur. So again, it's not all exactly the same, but for a takeaway for family members, can you see how you would be conditioned to certain responses? Carol, who is that? What is that? Well, come in here and tell me, because they're getting on my nerves. So at any rate, you will be conditioned to respond a certain way, and understand how trauma works. Trauma is any life-threatening, any kind of upsetting event, and again, it's up to you. If you define it as trauma, it's trauma. I can't look at you and say that's not a traumatic event that hasn't been processed, and what will happen is it will get stuck. And it'll get stuck, and it'll trigger unconscious behaviors. It'll trigger, really, really overreacting to situations. It'll trigger people, what was it?
People for the kickball meeting.
Oh, God. These freaking kickball players. Listen, and here's another thing I want to tell you. Favor Greenville has the worst athletic team in the history of the world. Oh, are you? I'm sorry. I love my kickball team. I love my kickball team.
They're the most spirited people.
Well, I mean, listen. If I was an owner of a professional sports franchise, I mean, we've won one game in the history of Favor Greenville, but we were disqualified because we didn't have enough girls playing. So we are 0-72 or something like that. But hey. But at any rate, so you get back to this idea of being triggered and being jumpy and reacting to it. So what happens is that the memory gets stuck or the experience gets stuck. And then anything that reminds you of that experience will get you emotionally upset. So let's just use an example. Let's say that there was a loud sound in the lobby. There was some kind of commotion. And I went out there and there was a life-threatening event. There were two guys fighting. I got in the middle of it. I literally felt like threatened for a moment. And then it kind of calmed down. The police came. And I came back in this room and I talked to you guys about it. Man, you won't believe what just happened. I'm processing it, right? And then let's say I go and I call my wife and I tell her about it. You won't believe what happened, and I'm processing it. Then I call my brother, and as I'm processing it, I'm becoming, it's moving along, and it doesn't have as much power over me. But let's think about addiction. What happens to family members with addiction? Something terrible happens. You know, maybe your son goes to jail, or there's an overdose, a life-threatening situation, and you don't tell anybody. Are you following me? You have the experience and you don't tell anybody. You don't tell anybody right away because what? You're worried, you're embarrassed, you're ashamed. We don't talk about this. It gets stuck. I'm telling you what happens is it gets stuck and it sits there and it sits in your amygdala, it sits in the back of your brain, and it just waits to be triggered. And what triggers it? All kinds of different things. Phone ringing in the middle of the night. Maybe the way the person is looking. Maybe I've heard people say the way that the person's voice sounds triggers it. You get a phone call and they say, I can't pay the rent this month. I don't know what I'm going to do. And against your better judgment, you run over and you pay the landlord. Why? Because you're reacting from a fight or flight point of view. You are reacting from a I have to save this person point of view. Not rational, from a trauma response. And that's what I believe is going on, Cynthia. And I think that if we did something like this, what you would see is it would be a different type of experience. It wouldn't look exactly like this. I don't think it would be about dopamine. I think it would be more about the pathways established through the trauma response, which would be, I don't have it up here. Well, actually I do.
Well, I guess that's.
It would take part, it would be right in here. It would be right in this part of the brain. Okay? And, yes, Frank?
I have something that happens to me, like if I'm trying to go to sleep and I'm thinking about things, and I roll through that bad thing, I'll jerk, like
Yeah.
my whole body will
Yeah.
actually jerk.
Yeah, and so there's the idea is that these memories or these experiences actually get frozen. They get stuck, and some of them do, some of them don't. What predicts whether or not they'll get stuck? First of all, how threatening they were perceived by the person. And again, it's a subjective experience. The second thing is whether or not you're able to talk about it and whether or not you feel safe and supported while you're talking about it. And if you feel like you never got a chance to process it, that will come into it. And the idea is that if you're able to move the memory along, that you'll be able to have a healthy relationship with this experience. And I'm of the opinion that one of the reasons why everyone looks so codependent in that behavior is because most family members are not processing what's going on with their loved one when it first starts happening. So I think a lot of family members start processing it after they seek help. But early on, you're kind of suffering in silence. I'm talking about real early on. You know, you're suffering in silence. You're not saying anything. You're not doing anything. You're just sucking it up, and you're just sort of waiting for the next thing to happen. And you got to remember, those memories trigger all the same feelings from the original event, or from the original events. And again, we've labeled that codependent. We've labeled the response to that enabling. And so, you know, we got to think about it a little bit different. But it does mimic what goes on with the loved one. You'll hear people say that, Rich, you were addicted to the drug, and you know, my wife was addicted to saving me. Or my wife was addicted. My wife wasn't really addicted to saving me. My wife was addicted to the idea of saving our marriage. And she was addicted to the white picket fence dream. Do you get that? Like it wasn't like she wanted something to happen to me, but it was exceedingly difficult for her to accept that this wasn't going to go down the way that it looked. And for parents, what's that like? Parents are addicted to the idea of saving their children. It's hardwired. It's literally hardwired, especially from moms to children, to try to save them, that kind of thing. So what other questions or comments about this process? Yes?
I have a 31-year-old. He's in jail. That's where he should be. I literally had to pray him there because nothing else was going to work. He's on meth, but wouldn't admit to it at the time. So we're not bailing him out. We're not paying for an attorney. So he's finally got himself a public defender. He now realizes that he might be there for even a year before, because of the court system, before he can even come up for court, because he doesn't have any help from us. He's okay with going. He wants to go to rehab.
Uh-huh.
So there's a place in Greenville called Solutions Recovery.
Yep.
And then there's a place in Sumter called Any Lakes.
Yep.
Those seem to be two good fits. He really thinks in his mind that he wants to work, be held accountable, and these guys will help him out. But a lot of people are telling me that this place in Greenville, Solutions Recovery, is not a good place.
So you get into a situation, the question is, or the concern is X facility, whatever the facility is, a good place for my loved one to go? You know, person in jail, mind clearing up a little bit, starting to say, you know, I'm ready to go, that kind of thing. Here's what I can tell you. These programs that you mentioned are only going to work for the person who's willing and for the person who's going to put their head down and do what they're supposed to do. They are not going to work with somebody who's not sure whether they want recovery or not. Any Lengths, Solutions, all these programs are designed for the person who is going to get it done. So if you are of the right mindset and you go, I'll be quite frank, if you go to any program and you're of the right mindset, you're going to get through the program. You can find people doing the right thing. But you can't, if you're like halfway sure, I'm not sure what I want to do, you know, if you're BSing your way, you're not going to make it in a program like that. They're not designed to pull anybody along. They're designed, you know, for the no nonsense. You got to do it, and you got to do it this way.
Reference to what you said, my family has been, I'm an addict actually. My family has been supporting me for a long time, and they did everything they could to get me out of trouble or whatever, to make me clean basically. I was in rehab about 11 years ago. They requested that, hey, it's enough now, go to rehab. My wife, she's right there, and my brother-in-law and all that. And I went there with the mindset that I wanted to get clean, but I wasn't sure do I want to do or not. Is it enough for me or not? I always had reservations in my head. And turned out that facility wasn't
wasn't right for me, to be honest. It was Northern on Vista Bay, California.
Oh, okay. Now you're-
97 days. No. 97 days. But again, like Reed said, I totally agree. I have to be 100% ready for it. This time I was.
And you're not gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
I went to another rehab after 11 years, which is just now about 2 months ago, 2.5, 3 months ago. And I was determined this time that I wanted to get clean. I was in Florida for 45 days. I willingly stayed another 15 days. I could have got out after 28 days. I willingly extended it to 45 days. I was ready to stay a little bit more. Unfortunately, I could not. But after that one, it worked because I wanted to work. I wanted to work on it. I'm here today. I'm here every day pretty much. But it's me. I wanted to be here. So your son needs to get in that mindset. I mean, that as he was rehab.
But let me say something
I have
else
a
about this.
Specific question then. He wants to go to Solutions Recovery because he can work
Yeah.
here and he kind of wants to stay here in Greenville, but he also is saying, I'm done with the drugs, but I really would like to stay here. I'm not sure I want to go to Sumter. So part of my family, because there's a mother that we're divorced and a stepfather and then my wife, half the family's like, well, we need to force him all or nothing to Sumter. And people are saying, well, Solutions Recovery is no good. But it's on your.
Oh, so if you wanted just a straight up.
Force him to go to one,
If
or-
you okay, so if you're looking at a situation, the question is, do we force somebody to go to Sumter or do we do the local program? This is where you start to become an expert at this stuff. When in doubt, when everything else is equal, always get them out of Dodge. Let me say that again. When in doubt, everything else being equal, always get them out of Dodge. Okay? Now if there's other compelling reasons to stay, like as if there is no other choice down the road, then keep them here. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it's just real logical stuff, guys. It's harder to do the right thing if you're in your backyard early on. It's just what? It's just tempting. You can contact people. It's not about the person's character or anything like that. Triggers and temptations, localized triggers and temptations are very, very difficult to get over. So if you have a choice between two places, one is in place A, which is my hometown, the other is in place B, they cost the same, everything else looks equal, I'm getting out of Dodge. Get them out of Dodge, reduce that temptation for a period of time. That's how you want to start thinking about that. And there is no other good answer for that. There is no other answer. You could search all day, you could talk to a lot of different people, but there is no other logical answer for that situation. There may be other reasons to keep somebody local, though. There may be other reasons. What would be other reasons? How much it costs. Maybe program B costs a lot more than program A. Maybe the person just absolutely refuses to go to program B, and so you're just going to take program A. I've done that before. Program A is better than being in your apartment without any support. Do you guys get that? So you take all those things into consideration. But if everything else is equal, like in other words, we can get them to go either way, then get out of Dodge. There's a principle about recovery, and you'll hear this phrase, people, places, and things. People, places, and things. It's all about environmental triggers, guys. And I got to tell you, when I was in early recovery, the only thing that I agreed with, now I did everything that I was supposed to do, but in my mind, the only thing I really agreed with was people, places, and things. It was the only thing that anybody said that made any sense to me. They said, go to a meeting every day. I said, how in the world is going to this meeting with these knuckleheads going to help me not use? They said, pray every day. I said, how is that? But when they got to stay away from people, places, and things, I was like, yep, I get that. I understand that. If I'm not hanging out with my buddies, if I don't have access to the substances, then I'm probably better off. So that's, and you're going to find that that's sort of across the board advice that you would get.
Rich, I hear this often. I can't go away because my child needs me.
And that could be legitimate, Hubert. That could be legitimate. So I don't want to go extreme to the other end. I don't want to go extreme and say there's no reason why people can't stay local. I mean, why there's never any reason why a person shouldn't stay local. Do you guys get that? Like, there absolutely are mitigating circumstances. What I'm saying is, if everything else is equal, if there really is no kind of legitimate reason. And a legitimate reason sometimes is this is the only place we can get them to go. You know, when you're taught to do ARISE intervention, so I'm a certified ARISE interventionist. There are 3 evidence-based intervention systems in America: the Johnson model, the Kraft model, and the ARISE intervention model. And so as a certified ARISE interventionist, we are taught to negotiate when necessary. So if Frank and I are talking and I'm saying you're going to go to rehab X, and he's like, I cannot go to rehab X. There are too many left-handed people in that rehab. What, Frank? Left-handed people are just like the rest of us. No, I'm not going. Okay, I'm going to go to rehab B. You know, we found a rehab with a bunch of right-handed people. Do you follow me? Like, you don't, some program is better than the ideal program. Here's the other thing, and I don't know how to say this without sounding simplistic. There aren't a lot of differences between programs, guys. Like, at the end of the day, a program is going to pretty much be looking to do the same type of thing. Especially these programs you guys are talking about. They're going to get you a job. They're going to have you working. Now, Any Length in Sumter is going to take a little longer to get a job, but they're going to get you a job too. And you're going to go to a bunch of 12-step meetings, and essentially you're going to do the same thing there that you would do here, just maybe it's going to take a little bit longer to get there. There is no perfect program for any of us. You want to do your homework. You want to learn as much as you can. I'll be honest with you. Cost has a lot to do with it. I think, how much does it cost to get there, and what's that like, and how long are you going to be there, and how much is this totally going to cost us, is part of the equation. So you take all those into consideration. Did you want to say something? Did you have your hand up earlier? Okay. Did you want to say something? Yep.
Well, I just wanted to comment, somebody said about the child beating them, not wanting to go to rehab for that reason. In our case, we have a 9-year-old grandson living with us, and my daughter had finally decided to go to a residential rehab. And then kind of last minute, she got cold feet. And this 9-year-old came in and said, Mommy, you have to do this to get better. Don't underestimate the power of children on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, any other questions or comments about those scenarios? So let's just take this example and use it in terms of codependency. So how would this play out with this where should my loved one go to treatment scenario? Where should they go to residential treatment? How would codependency play out in an unhealthy way? If you are sitting here right now saying to yourself, I do not want to send my loved one to Sumter because it's going to upset him, that's an example of codependent thinking. Now, if you're sitting here saying, I don't want to send my loved one to Sumter, and I'm just using this as an example, because he's going to, never see his kids again or something like that. If there's a real reason, that's not. But you get where I'm coming from? If it's only because it's going to upset them, they're not going to like it. You guys, if you're making decisions based on the fact that they're not going to like it, then that would fall into this pattern of codependent behavior. Because what you're doing now is you're not necessarily using your rational thinking. Your first thought is, how is he going to respond to this? How is he going to react to this? That kind of thing. How is she going to respond to this? How is she going to react to this? That's whenever you're starting to give up your own better judgment because you're afraid somebody else's feelings are going to be upset. And you got to understand, that's a process for you guys to overcome. That's not simple either. This is where family recovery comes in. This is where you have to practice this stuff. None of us are good at this. There are things that I do every day that I should be doing different because I don't want her to be upset or I don't want him to be upset. We all do this to a certain degree. But we just want to be honest, like, with what's driving our decision. What's our misgivings around any particular boundary? Why are we not wanting to set this? There are other reasons that come in when people have trouble following boundaries. It's not always about codependency. It could also be about very real things like what? Fear. And we're not sure where this is going to go or what's going to happen if we set the boundary. but you really just want to be thinking about it. Some characteristics of codependency: difficulty identifying your own feelings. You tend to focus more on the other person than focusing on yourself. You'll know a person is struggling with codependency whenever you talk to them and you say, "How's it going, Judy?" or "How's it going, Rich?" and they tell you about their loved one rather than telling you about themselves. "Oh, he's doing great. He's in rehab in Florida. He's doing great." I didn't ask how he was doing. I asked how you were doing. Does that make sense? Has anybody ever here experienced that? You have absolutely experienced that. You know, your mood on any given day has more to do with what's going on with the other person than necessarily what's going on with you. And that's when you start to get into some of the classic stuff. Difficulty expressing feelings. A lot of times people who are dealing with this, they don't want to say exactly how they feel. Can anybody guess one of the main reasons why they don't want to say exactly how they feel? Anybody have a thought?
They don't feel good.
They don't feel good, and they don't want to say it because they don't want to upset anybody. We're walking around on eggshells a little bit here. We don't want to upset the apple cart. You'll hear people say, "I'm afraid if I do that, it's going to get them going, and they're going to get, what if they go get high? What if they go get drunk?" Remember, you're not your boss. So, it's this, you kind of like abandon yourself to a certain degree. You abandon yourself as if you're not important, the other person is more important. The other person's feelings are more important. Difficulty forming and maintaining close relationships. This means close relationships with people outside of the person that you're codependent with. Main reason here, guys, is because it sucks up all your time. One of the interesting things, if you look at some of the criteria, if you look at the criteria for substance use disorder, you'll see where a great deal of time, I don't know if it's up here or not, inability, great deal of time spent managing the substance use. This is for the addict. You could say the same thing for the person, for the codependent. You could run down a lot of this criteria, and it's very, very similar. Can't cut down, can't control. You try not to take the phone call. You try not to rescue the person. You try not to say yes, but you can't stick to your own boundaries. It's a similar process that a person goes through. Perfectionism and black and white thinking. Everything is either okay or it's all over. Everything is, he's doing great, she's doing great, or what? It's a catastrophe. And they're going to get high again, and it's all going to fall apart. And then difficulty adjusting to change. Why is difficulty adjusting to change a big deal for somebody who's going through this? What do you think that's all about?
Addicts just don't like change.
Well, this would be more for the person who's a family member. And what I think it is that anything... Go ahead.
We were discussing this at the Narnon meeting. My son has come from Connecticut down to Columbia, staying with his mother now. And I said, and even though I haven't talked to him in over a year, he says, "We'll talk when I'm ready to talk." The rules have changed. Now all of a sudden, instead of being 800 miles away, he's 80 miles away.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it's like a chess game. I don't know what to do.
No, that's exactly right.
I have no idea.
So that's 100% correct. The rules have changed. So think about this. Even if it's a dysfunctional situation, it's still a predictably dysfunctional situation. But when it changes, now in the back of your mind, you're like, "Oh, what's this mean? What's going to happen now?" And sometimes people, believe it or not, will talk about struggling with the change, even if the change is positive. Struggling with the change, even if the change is positive. So remember what happens. When you're in that family and you're in that family system, you learn how to interact with each other through this chaos. You learn how to interact with each other through the conflict. And then all of a sudden, if the person gets into recovery, this is how it was in my situation. All of a sudden, we get into recovery, I get into recovery, and things got worse. Things got worse. And then I had the greatest line that anybody in recovery has ever said to their loved one. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
And if you're in recovery, you can use it. It is statistically impossible that every problem in our relationship is my fault because I'm an alcoholic. Okay? It is absolutely, in the universe of possibilities, that is not possible. That every problem we have ever had and every problem we ever will have is because I'm an alcoholic. Okay? And that's where we had to get into some other type of help to kind of move through that. But because, even though it was a good change, it was still change. And we get comfortable as human beings. We get comfortable with predictability, even if it's predictably bad, if that makes sense. Yes?
I made an analogy, it's like a tug of war. You're both, the addict is pulling one way, you're pulling, it's static.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the addict throws the rope down. You don't know what to do.
And I would have...
Even if putting the rope down means doing the good thing, all of a sudden it's like, well, what do I do?
And you could probably look at patterns. I can't say this for sure, but you may be able to look at patterns where you see that it's almost like predictable. It starts to, even though again it's chaotic and it's out of control and some of the details might change, but there's still like a pattern. I'll give you an example from like crisis to crisis. So everything's okay, everything's going all right, you know, then I go out and what? I just go off because I have a problem with alcohol. I have alcohol use disorder, and so I go out all night and it gets really, really bad and the crap hits the fan, right? And then what? There's a crisis, and the crisis is followed by the fighting and the you need help and you better get it together. And then there's the fight, and then I leave the house and I go to my mom's house for a while, and then I come back, and what do? I come back and I crawl back in. Please forgive me, it won't happen again. And then a week goes by, and what do I say? I'm just going to get a six-pack. And I start the whole process over again. Do you see how that's completely dysfunctional, but it's predictable? It's predictable, and we subconsciously fall into comfort in that process, guys. And then as soon as we break it, as soon as we break that process, it freaks us out subconsciously. This is why some people will, you know, it'll get worse, and it'll actually like be more difficult once recovery enters the picture, because it changes everything. Did somebody else have their hand up? Yes.
I want to add to that difficulty adjustment change. I mean, I made the decision to file for divorce. She's out of the house. And it was, in essence, really to try to change that pattern. I basically made a decision that I'm not going to be able to save her.
Yeah.
She's got to save herself. She's got to understand the consequences. But the decision was tough, but the change has been extremely tough. It's not dealing with chaos,
Yeah.
benefit, but not having my wife and having to know that we're getting ready to divorce.
It's more difficult. It's
It's really,
Yeah.
really been hard on me. So
Yeah. So you're living through that right now.
I'm going through it right now.
And so the key to that is that you have to sort of trust yourself, and you have to trust the decisions that you've made. And none of us know exactly what's coming around the corner, but you sort of have to say, let's take this a day at a time and see what happens, and see if this starts to improve, see if my mood starts to improve. You know, there's nothing easy about going through any of this stuff, guys. There's nothing. I wish there was a magic formula. I do. That's where you sort of have to trust that, you know, you made the right decision that you needed to at that time. Whether it's divorce, or whether it's you can no longer live here, or whether let's do the intervention, whatever it might be. Couple other things in relation to characteristics. Feeling overly responsible for the feelings and behaviors of others. That's a classic one, right? Got that one down? I'm responsible for the way they feel. I'm responsible for their happiness. I'm responsible. I always joke. I have a running joke here at Favor about the difference between family group and all recovery group. Every day at noon we have all recovery group, and you can be in an all recovery group, and you know it's all a bunch of people, a bunch of addicts in the room. You know, we're all trying to get better. We're a bunch of alcoholics. We're trying to get better. Somebody starts crying over in the corner. Nobody even looks at them. They're like, whatever, shut the. If somebody cries in this room, 75 people jump up with Kleenexes. Right? People throw each other out of the way. I'm going to help them. I'm going to help them. Get out of my way. You're responsible for the feelings of other people. You can't stand seeing other people hurt. You can't stand seeing other people upset. Very classic example. The constant need for approval from others, especially from the person that you're trying to help. This idea of recognize that I'm doing this. Recognize that I'm doing all this work. Recognize that I'm trying to make this better. Difficulty making decisions. If I say this, if I do this, what if I tell them they have to leave or go to rehab? All the scenarios. How many people know how to play all the scenarios out in their mind? All the what ifs. You got like a decision tree. You got like a flow chart going in your mind. You know, here's what's going to happen if I say yes. Here's what's going to happen if I say no. And it's, you know, it can be exhausting, absolutely exhausting. General feeling of powerlessness. Life is out of control. This is the, what do they call it, the 32-hour day? Living with a person in active addiction is like a 32-hour day. That's how much effort is involved on any given day. It's exhausting. And it's exhausting even when nothing's going on, it's exhausting, right? Because you're waiting for that next call. You're waiting for that next situation. Even if nothing's happening, even if everything's calm for the moment, in the back of your mind, there's that trauma response. Don't relax. Don't relax. When's the other shoe going to drop? That kind of thing. That can go on for a while even when the person enters recovery. A basic sense of shame and low self-esteem. What did I do wrong? What could have I done different? I can't believe it's turned out this way. All those type of things. And when you look at some of this is trying to redirect your thinking. Remember, if we believe that addiction is a healthcare issue, okay, this isn't about what anyone did wrong or what anyone did right. This isn't about, we could all spend all day like second guessing, should have done this, should have done that. It would be great if we lived life on the rewind button. It would be awesome. If we could, if it was like a DVR, we could kind of go back to that point in time and take care of this or take care of that. That's not what this is about. This is a brain issue. This is a healthcare issue. Try to redirect your thinking if you find yourself going down that line. The other thing that's interesting is many times people who are codependent, they kind of are viewed by the family as holding everything together, as very, very strong. And the truth is they're about one click away from their own breakdown. How many people in here have gone through that? Oh yeah. If you didn't raise your hand, it's just because you didn't want to. You're probably too tired to because you're exhausted. You're sort of always on the game, always on the ball. We're going to get this to work out. We're going to get this to work out. We're going to get this to work out. But inside, you probably feel exhausted. And on any given day, again, this is where the rehab for families would come in.
Can I say something?
Yes.
And when I knew that was me is when the other family members were telling me what to tell my daughter. And
Right.
I finally realized I needed to be saying, have you said that to her? Why
Yeah.
did you say that to her?
Yeah. Why don't you do this? You should do that. You should just do this. Why don't you just do that? If anybody starts talking to you like that, that's just when you got to say, hey, the dog needs to go out. Or, I got to go. There's someone on the other line, that kind of thing. Everyone thinks I'm so strong. All my friends and relatives come to me with their problems. But if they only knew the real me, they would be very surprised. Sometimes it's all I can do to just get through the day. That kind of stuff. You take it on. And a lot of times, if you're not careful, it will translate beyond even the individual person. You almost become habitual in your helping. You just sort of, everyone for that matter. It's interesting here at Favor Greenville. One of the things that I'm very comfortable with at Favor Greenville is, something's allowed to go wrong here. This is something I feel like I do a good job with. People are allowed to make mistakes. I'll give you an assignment, and you may screw it up. But here's what I've noticed: some of our family, and it's always on the family end, they want to protect people from the mistakes they're going to make. Like they'll come to me and say, "Do you know that they're about to send this letter out, and this letter has a typo in it? So what? Send it out." Okay? Well, I want to protect them from that mistake. It's this. Then you're getting into this classic kind of don't let anything bad happen to anybody kind of mentality. And that's when you know that this is going beyond even your own individual family relationship. You can start to get to a situation, if you're not careful, that the caretaking can be for anyone and everyone if you're not careful. Why is that happening? It's habitual, right? It's a habit. Why does any habit occur? Well, you don't really know exactly when it starts. Where it wasn't like on Wednesday you weren't codependent and on Thursday you were. That's not how the world works. But it's more like a fog. It kind of just sets in. But once you get in the habit of rescuing people, you have to be careful. You're in the habit of rescuing people. So current research also suggests, and this is very, very important, this goes on in a lot of situations where addiction is not even present. The rescuing behavior, those type of relationships, those type of situations, it goes beyond addiction. And remember, again, it's how do you know whether this is something you need to address? If you're losing yourself in the other person, if your feelings mean nothing, If they're up, you're up. If they're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. If they're having a good day, you're having a good day. That's when you know you're kind of pushing it. And again, if you're in recovery, this is healthy for your loved ones to change in this regard. You get that? Like, so I'm over here, I'm in recovery, and I would want my wife to hear this because it's healthy for her to start to make these changes, because ultimately you can't live that other way. You cannot live with one person taking care of the other person. You can't, and ultimately you can't even do that parent to child, right? That won't work. That'll wear you out. That'll wear you out. It just will not, it's unsustainable. Yes, Gay?
I just wanted to ask, have they ever made codependency an addiction? I mean, where it's
No.
truly classified as an addiction?
No, her question was, has it ever been classified as actually an addiction? You mean like, that would be essentially in the DSM-5, which is the manual that...
That's what I'm talking about.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But I could find other diagnoses that would work, Gay. Like, so if anybody wants a diagnosis, let me know. I mean, well, there's like 367 diagnoses in there. Like, literally being alive is a diagnosis. Being alive is a chronic, fatal condition. Right? So, no, but there isn't anything. And a lot of it is kind of emerging, and people are thinking about it differently. We try to think about it differently, just more about, not about the principles, because those are real. I mean, I think that happens. I just don't want anyone in this room to walk out thinking like, I don't like labels. Because I feel like labels are they can be negative and they can be pejorative. I don't want labels. But you want to think more about the principles. And am I going through any of that myself? Because that's the stuff that you can correct. People who have grown up with these rules, a lot of times it's intergenerational because these rules have existed in families. And so you kind of learn them as you go through. Now the cool thing is you can break that. You guys are probably breaking this in your family because you're here. We broke this in my family. My father is in active addiction to this day. So he has his issues. It tore up my family. It tore up my family of origin. My mom and my dad get a divorce. Bad situation. Bad situation. All kind of codependent stuff going on everywhere, right? My mom starts to get better. My mom starts to take care of herself, and to a certain degree, she's somewhat of like a boundary-setting ninja these days, I've noticed. And so, how does that happen? It happens by going to groups and things like that, but what that does is that makes it less likely that it's going to go on in my family, too. It makes it less likely it's going to... there are other factors, and I should have said this earlier, other things to be aware of in your family. Like, you'll see like there are even gender factors around codependency. So like, for example, a lot of times fathers tend to be more codependent with their daughters than they are their sons. I remember, when my son was going to go out and kind of like do his thing, right? He was like leaving the University of Pittsburgh. He's like, I don't need that. I'm going to go out and find my fortune. Okay, all right. Dropped him off at the bus. Remember driving away. He was going from the bus in Pittsburgh out to Philly and to stay with his girlfriend. And I remember driving away and looking in the mirror, and he just looked like he was the happiest person in the world. He had like $12 in his pocket. It was like 7 degrees below zero, no coat. And I just drove away. But with my daughter, if my daughter called right now and she said, oh, Daddy, I have a flat tire or something, or this group would end now. Like now. Okay? The door wouldn't get locked. I would run and sprint to my car and drive as fast as I could to save her life. That's just a difference. And actually, like, you could make an argument that what my son was doing was probably worse and probably more dangerous. That kind of thing. So you have to be aware of where your own personal vulnerabilities are. What's going to push your buttons? Yes?
My youngest daughter, who died of an overdose in February, she grew up, she was the youngest, and her brother and sister are 8 years and 9 years older than she was. They struggled with addiction problems. She became the child, really now I see, who was codependent and who was always trying to fix them. Of course,
yeah.
I was trying to fix them. And she saw that pattern. And then when she became an adult and got into relationships, she tended to go towards the person who needed help, who needed, in fact, it was somebody that was on drugs. And she was going to make them well and make them better.
Yeah.
And she did this in 2 relationships. And this was a smart, educated, college-educated woman with a teaching degree who was drawn towards, and I know it was part making her feel better about herself too. This goes a lot deeper than this. A lot of onions peeled back.
Yep.
But then she had a terrible car accident, and she ended up on pain pills and became addicted to them, and she was the addict, and she couldn't save herself. It was
you know, like, so if you believe like basic psychology, and you believe, you know, how this stuff works, can you guys get in touch with the idea that a lot of things operate at a subconscious level? A lot of decisions that we all make, including your daughter and who she was associating with, is at a subconscious level, and we're sort of just drawn to the person, right? But what we don't know is that we're reenacting all those things that we learned as a child growing up. If you guys know, one of the earliest and one of the most effective and most popular support groups for families was Adult Children of Alcoholics. It was a 12-step program that was everywhere in the 1980s. I have no idea why it faded away, but it was all about identifying those patterns. It was all about, you know, it was a 12-step program, but it was all about identifying how we repeat these patterns. And it goes back to this idea of familiarity. Messages were sent when we're very, very young. And now what's the antidote for that? The antidote is awareness. The antidote is to try to be in meetings like this so that you can become more and more aware of what your patterns are. For us parents and for spouses that are seeing somebody go through this, it's very hard because we might recognize it, right? You may recognize it in somebody that you love right now. But what do? I do not suggest you go home tonight and say, sit down there, Johnny, I want to talk to you for a minute. I want you to understand that you are playing out subconscious patterns from your childhood. And I want you to break up with that girl immediately. Immediately. She is clearly, that's countertransference around a mother figure. What? You know, it's not going to go well. And so you have to try to nudge the person, maybe get the person this type of information, get them to come to groups like this. But I know that happens. I know that absolutely. If you are, you know, if you're in a pattern of saving people, you're going to continue to act that pattern out until you do something to break that pattern. It's not going to break on its own. It's not going to break on its own. And so, very, very, very good. Thank you for sharing. So if you look at the term enabling, the enabler is an individual who reacts to the symptoms of the illness, in this case the illness is addiction, in such a way as to shield the dependent person from experiencing the full impact of the harmful consequences. That's the classic definition of enabling. It's very specific, right? If you're doing something to shield the person from the natural consequences of their behavior over and over and over again, it could be something you want to take a look at. It could be something you want to take a look at. It's not as black and white as it sounds, because there are certain things where, you know, you might not have a choice but to continue to shield them from it. And it's very, very rare that somebody doesn't shield their loved one from the consequences initially. Would you guys agree with that? Most people, almost 100% of the people, will shield their loved one from the consequences initially, even if it's legal consequences. Very few people on that first offense will not bail their loved one out of jail. But what it is it's a repetitive issue. If it happens 2, 3, 5, 10 times, then you're going to start challenging yourself a little bit. You want to start redirecting some of this. It's interesting when you look at, you know, what are the progression. You know, we've talked about the progression of substance use. There's also a lot of kind of predictable progression around enabling. Stage 1 is called protection. Small tasks usually, not necessarily the large ones, calling in sick. You know, they're hungover. You call in, make sure that they don't get in trouble. Picking up after them, making sure they go to their appointments. Now, I have a little bit of a different opinion on appointments, but basically, you know, it's not related to the big stuff. It starts off small, kind of like, very similar, if we look at the criteria for addiction. You see this where it says tolerance? What happens with drug use and alcohol use? It starts off small and it gets big. It's also progressive. So what happens with enabling? It starts off small and it gets big. What do you think? Do you buy that?
Can't enabling stem from guilt too?
I think it can stem from a lot of things, for sure. I think there's a lot of things that drive. The question was, can it stem from guilt? I think it can absolutely stem from guilt. You know, and it starts off small and it gets bigger. And different things that the person tells themselves. You know, in terms of like, okay, so how does the dynamic work? Excuse me. So the dynamic, what's the addict doing and what is the enabler doing in response to the addict? So some common things that the addict engages in. Rationalization, it's no big deal. The enabler believes it. Early on, you kind of fall for it. Would anyone agree with that? You know, repression. Repression is basically denying that it even exists. That's classic, like you didn't see what you want to see. And then see what happens to the enabler. You feel like you're crazy. How many people can relate to the idea of feeling like you're crazy? I mean, I know we talk, I'm not seeing what I think I see. That kind of thing. Projection is when the person makes you feel like it's your fault. Has that ever happened? You know, how many people have been told, okay, so is this a familiar kind of like argument or conversation? You know, you're out of control. I'm really worried about you. This using's out of control. You need help. You need help. You're crazy. You're out of control. You need help. Do you ever hear it? Like you flip the script. We're taught that early on in addict school. That's a standard move, right? We're taught that in early on. We get in a room and Jerry Garcia is teaching class, and he's kind of like, listen up. Here's the first thing you do. Like as soon as they start, if anybody says you need help, here's what you do. You say, no, you need help. And I remember when he first told me that, I was like, Jerry, dude, that makes no sense. He's like, try it. So I went home that night and I tried it. What I realized is it gets my wife completely off guard. She doesn't know what to make of the situation. And I'm able to continue. Remember, our goal is to what? Continue doing what we're doing. Continue doing what we're doing. It's not necessary to win a logical debate. This is very important. When we're arguing with you in the middle of an episode, we're not actually trying to get you to change your mind. We're trying to get you to give in and just leave us alone. Because what we're trying to do is protect the addiction. Does that make sense? That's our main goal. It's not, we have no intention on winning a debate. We're not keeping a ledger where like I won that one, she won that one. It's nothing like that. It's like literally like, what can I say, what can I do that's going to get you to be quiet so that I can do what I need to do for today? So projections, you know, you need help. It's you need help. You're crazy. You know, you're not seeing what you think you're seeing. And then the dependent is irresponsible, and then a lot of times the enabling person will overcompensate. Yes, sir.
I feel like I'm going through that right now. Irresponsible, over-responsible. So my son today, he's in jail for the second time. He's hit about 4 different counties. He's had this problem for about 14, 16 years. And I've been standing my ground in the sense that I've always provided for this kid. And now he's really upset that I will not give an extra $20 a month for food, underwear. These are normal things in a jail, that they get underfed and all that. But for me, this is a big hurdle.
This is a big hurdle.
Because, you know, like you said, you're wired to provide, and now all of a sudden you're telling your boy, hey, you're on your own. You're going to make it through jail, but I'm not going to make it a little easier for you. I'm
Yeah.
gonna, you know, sorry if you got one pair of underwear. Sorry if you're not getting all the food you want. Sorry if you're not getting coffee. And it's a breakthrough for me a little bit.
It is, and you almost have to practice it.
Yeah, and like today didn't go well. I mean,
Yeah.
he was angry, he hung up the phone, and basically said, don't bother visiting me.
Yeah.
And be honest with you, it kind of hit me hard. Went to the car, kind of like cried a little bit. It was a little crying about for him too, because of
Yeah.
where he's at. but also for myself, like, I guess a self-pity party in the sense.
No, I think it's very natural.
Yeah, well, I knew one thing, I needed to cry to let it out.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hold it back there, I wanted to release it. I'm a crier anyway, but.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great example. You guys are changing a pattern of behavior that's been going on for quite a while, and you're going to have to give yourself a break while you work at it. And you're not going to do it perfectly. You're going to put the money on the card every once in a while. You're going to overdo it every once in a while. But what you're doing is you're now paying attention to it. You're living life, you're going from the subconscious automatic behavior driven by trauma, driven by codependency, to actually thinking it through. And even if you don't do it perfectly, you're at least thinking of it. That's very important for you guys to know. Do you guys get that? As soon as you take it from the realm of the subconscious to the conscious, you're starting to win the battle. Even if on any given day you can't do it. So if on any given day, you're just sort of like you're too sad, you're too frustrated, you're too scared, so you give in. Still though, if you're doing it consciously, you're taking a step toward the right solution. Because remember, most of this happens automatically. Most of this happens automatically. It's a survival mechanism. You just boom, you do it. Boom, you do it. Boom, you do it. Boom, you do it. As soon as you start saying, wait, what's going on here? I'm going to hold off and I'm not going to put any money on this card. I'm going to wait as long as I possibly can because I'm going to break this pattern. I'm going to work on this today, and that'll ultimately be good for him too. But here's the thing. No addicted person, when you start setting boundaries, okay, and you start changing your behavior, I'm going to guarantee you one thing that will not happen. Your addicted loved one will not look at you and say, thank you for doing that. I'm so glad that you're no longer going to do what I want you to do. They're not going to say that. What are they going to do? Wailing and gnashing of teeth. I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you said that. Who do you think you are? Oh my God, don't ever come back here. Don't ever visit me. I don't want anything to do with you. Because remember, they're still, even if they're not actively using right now, if they're not in a recovery process, they're still probably in that old school way of thinking. That kind of thing. So, and what do? You practice these boundaries. You practice these boundaries. You practice. Sometimes some people would say practice setting small boundaries. Practice saying no to certain things. See what you can do, see what you can't do. That kind of thing. Yes?
Can I say something? This is my fault, and obviously we're talking about brings back the situation with my daughter who's a heroin addict. The night that I wouldn't let her in for the first time, I changed that. It was icy and she was freezing and all that. I said she couldn't come in, and she told me that she hated me and I was the worst mother ever. And I absolutely, totally fell apart and cried on my husband's shoulder all night long. But after that, and I really started getting some recovery, a similar situation happened and it totally bounced off me.
Yeah. Right.
It's because I dug deep.
Right.
With my recovery plan. It
Yeah.
totally bounced off.
Yeah. You got to get in touch with, if you're dealing with somebody who's with a substance use disorder, that this has nothing to do with you're a good mom, you're a bad mom, you're a good wife, you're a bad husband. It has nothing to do with bad dad, none of that stuff. That it's all about that brain, and it's all about the drive to get the next thing, okay? Anything else that needs to be worked out, family relationships, whatever, that doesn't come until way, way down the road. This is about that. Because again, we're not talking about, you guys aren't sitting here because somebody's probably using recreationally. We're talking about heavy duty stuff, right? This person is not of sound mind. And so you're going to get all those things, all those horrible things that people say. I had a person in my office the other day, and she was talking about, she was working through a thing that happened when her son was in an emergency room, and the things that her son had said to her, okay? And I've worked with this person off and on, and to try to get her to talk about this, and super painful, horrible things, right? That really cut to the quick. And talking about it, when you say work your recovery plan, part of that is talking about it and getting a perspective on it. Yep. You know what I mean? Yep. Getting a perspective on what's going on. I've shared it here before. Every night, tonight when I go home, every Monday night I call my mom and tell her I love you, I'm sorry. Okay? And because I didn't have a perspective on what that was like for her. did not have a perspective. And because what you got to understand is I never even thought of it. Do you guys get this may be very difficult to understand. When I was doing that stuff and I was going off like that and I was keeping her up all night and I was, because way before I got married, I was out of control. Let's go on the record. I put my mom through the stuff that your kids put you guys through. And I never thought about it. I can't explain it. Like, I actually never thought about it. I never thought, like, am I ruining her night? Or you have tunnel vision, guys. When you are in active addiction, you have tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision is, where do I get it? Where do I get it? Not, oh, I shouldn't have done that to my mom. Oh, I shouldn't have done that to my dad. Oh, that was probably... It's almost like, and this isn't good to say, but it's almost like you're indifferent about it to a certain extent. Because what it is, where am I going to get it? Where's the next thing? What's the next thing? Where's the next thing? Right now, what your son's acting out in jail is that same type of thinking, but it's no longer about a substance. It's now about, I want coffee, I want the beef jerky, I want whatever, and screw you, get it. Because he hasn't found recovery yet. Do you guys get that? Because you can be not using, but not be in recovery. Life is going to get better, and you're going to be more healthy, but you can be still in that mindset of, like, they owe me, they owe me, they owe me. And that's all part of that. People used to call that dry drunk. I don't like that terminology, but it's that kind of thinking. Does somebody else have their hand up? Did you? Yes.
I want to thank you because here I am, 71, and learning something that I never really thought that I was suffering from. But I'm in a family. I'm a stepmother, and I care about our addicts. But it's not. It seems to me that I had to be supportive of the people that are the family, the blood, right? So now I'm realizing I have all those, because I have no control over anything.
Yeah.
That I'm over-responding. Someone at church the other day said to me, you notice everything when something's wrong. There's Franny going over to help, and I wasn't realizing
that it's subconscious, it's conditioned.
And my childhood as well.
Yeah.
But, I thank you for that, so I'm going to try to work that.
Well, and that's why we are big on this idea of family recovery, working on your own awareness. And if you can't do anything to affect change in your loved one, you start to affect change in you. And that goes back to how the family system works. And if you move one part of the family, you move the entire family. So you start to work on that, and everybody in this room, there should be one thing that you're saying to yourself is, it'll never be the same because I'm not going back to suffering in silence. I'm not going back to being uneducated about this issue. I'm going to keep coming to Favor Greenville. I'm going to keep reading books. I'm going to keep going to other groups. So in that regard, it'll never be the same. That's the type of stuff you want to start thinking of, because you can control that. You can control that. And you can start to control your reaction in the moment. You can start to try to notice whenever you go to that situation or you go to that type of thinking and try to course correct, try to redirect your thinking. What other questions or comments before we wrap it up for tonight? Yes?
One question. When you're trying to break that cycle of codependency or enabling, there is a lot of fear associated with it.
Yes.
Setting boundaries, and everything is good until you're actually in the groove of the situation, and you're trying to follow real hard, and you feel like there's a lot of fear.
Yes.
How do you cope with that?
So that's where I believe you have to have some kind of support. You have to have someone you can talk to in that moment. It's like me when I'm trying to recover, right? It's all fine and dandy in theory when I'm sitting in rehab. It's all great. Never going to use again. Never. Until I'm in, right? How do I get through that? How do I not pick up? You have to have a group. Hopefully maybe you have somebody you trust. It could be a family member, a friend. It could be a coach. You have to talk out loud about that stuff. If you look, why do people enable? Like, feelings of fear is right on the list. It's almost a universal experience of, like, I can't do that. I can't change that because it's going to get really, really bad. That kind of thing. So, all right. Well, good deal. This is outstanding. I'm so glad to be back. Last week I was in Huntington, West Virginia for a conference. I was a keynote speaker at Marshall University. That was very, very interesting. They got a lot of really cool stuff going on in Huntington, but the reason they have a lot of really cool stuff is it's really, really tough, guys. Like I'm glad Favor's here, and I feel like we're doing a good job to get ahead of the curve in terms of this opioid epidemic, because let me tell you, there's the opioid epidemic and then there's the opioid epidemic. And it's hitting some parts of the country really, really hard. So we will be back here next Monday, same bat time, same bat channel, different format, and then we'll be back the following week with another lecture. Remember, if you have any ideas or thoughts on things that we should be talking about, tell your coach about it, or email me, or let somebody know here. I'm very open to different ideas and different types of topics and things like that. All right? So if we can get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, thank you very much, guys.